Good morning, everyone. It is great to see you all again. I think the mic is working, right?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I'm truly honored to be introducing Tony Aguilar. We may have crossed paths in Iraq because I was there for 5 years, while you were there. I was with the United Nations and so on. Um, um, Lieutenant Colonel retired Anthony Aguilar was commissioned into the U.S. Army from the United States Military Academy, Big Feet at West Point. He served for 25 years in uniform as a combat infantry officer and a Special Forces Green Beret. Over his military career, he deployed 12 times in support of combat operations and U.S. Operations abroad to Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Tajikistan. We want to ask you about Syria. Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Jordan, the Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. He's a highly decorated combat veteran and was awarded the Purple Heart from being wounded in combat, a Bronze Star for valor in combat, and an Army Commendations Medal for valor in combat. He was in Gaza working under GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, from May 17, 2025 through June 26, 2025. We are going to turn to you, but I want to say something that when we first saw you, we said this man is a hero. He really is in every sense of the word, because what you did was really expose this horrific scam that is intended to basically force the Palestinians out, to kill the Palestinians, to decimate them, and so on. That's the whole plan. So without further ado, Colonel Tony. Thank you.
Well, I'm very honored to be here this morning and to continue this very important discussion with everyone. And I think that now, as important as ever, that we keep Gaza and Palestinians in the forefront of conversation. I feel that the administration is attempting to whitewash and bury what's happening under a false narrative of a ceasefire. It is not a ceasefire by any stretch of the imagination. And there also must be accountability. Our lawmakers who have been complicit in what's been going on in Gaza and the occupied territories in the West Bank, sorries and, oh, we should have known better or never again is not going to cut it. There must be accountability. And it's going to be up to those that understand the truth, that understand that what is happening is a genocide. There's no mincing of words. And this conversation is important to keep at the forefront of the media and everywhere else. So I'll start by saying that I recognize that there is nothing that I have shared or said or have brought to the attention of the world that is new information. Palestinians have been begging for the world to pay attention to this for years. And what I bring to this is not anything new, but I feel that my voice can help with the cause because it's very difficult for Zionists or those that want to push back against the truth to say that I don't know what I'm talking about. Not only was I there, I have witnessed and been a part of chasing U.S. policy around the globe for the last 25 years, achieving nothing but further destruction of our planet and the security of our world. And it's happening in Gaza. I mean, that's just a fact. So one thing I use the word genocide, and at times when I've talked to lawmakers, they have told me that, well, that's hyperbole, or we understand that there's a ethnic cleansing and death, but it hasn't met the threshold of genocide. And what I share with them is a definition of genocide. And when I do, the response that I get is, well, that's what the UN says. And I think it's important to understand this because I've informed and educated lawmakers, which is surprising to me because as a lawmaker, they should know the law. But the definition of genocide under the Convention Implementation Act of Genocide, it's incredibly important to understand this for all of us to see that what is happening is a genocide. And you can be confident in that the intentional destruction or through wanton negligence of a national or ethnic or racial or religious group in whole or in part. Not all of the above, or, in whole or in part. Are the Palestinians an ethnic or racial or religious group? Yes. Do they have recognition and should they have their own state and therefore have the recognition of a nation? Yes. All or in part. We're seeing it every day. Through acts of killing, serious bodily harm, deliberate infliction of conditions of life to cause all of the above, to include the forceful displacement of people. It's undeniable. And when a lawmaker says, well, that's what the UN says, I respond to them, that's not true, Senator or Congressman. That is federal criminal law, Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Section 1091. That is U.S. law, of which we inherited into our laws from an adaptation of the Geneva Convention. It's a genocide by every name. What I have come to realize and come to learn that people that have the ability to make change, our lawmakers or leaders in our world, no longer deny or refute what's happening. They refuse to take action, because taking action then means that we have to face our close strategic ally, Israel, in the region. And there's repercussions to that that our lawmakers don't want to face, whether it's compromised politically, financially, personally, whether it's a shared belief in a Christian Zionist or a Zionist mindset, which is not good for the world, or they simply feel that they want to wait things out to see where things fall politically. Maybe they can survive if they stay on track with AIPAC and with the Israeli narrative, or if it doesn't work out that way, they'll just say that they were always against this, just like most of the world will say here soon. We were always against this. In Gaza, the bombs have not stopped. Despite that, if Israel forces do not drop another bomb, and remember, 70,000 tons of bombs have dropped. Every single one of those is provided by the United States. Joint deployed aerial munition, guided bomb units deployed from F-35 aircraft do not blow up schools on accident. In order to deploy a joint munition from an F-35 requires input into a grid to drop that bomb on a location. It does not happen by accident. Every school, every mosque, every schoolyard, church, hospital that has been bombed, destroyed, and is now buried in rubble is intentional. Not one has been dropped on accident. It's impossible. And we have provided those munitions. We have provided those aircraft. We have provided that technology. We trained the Israeli pilots here in the United States. We trained them. Our fingerprints and our DNA are all over this, and not just us, but the world. 90% of all livable housing in Gaza is destroyed, gone. There's estimated to be over 50 million tons of unusable rubble that will take, if we started today, until 2050 to clear it. Uninhabitable. Open sewage. 76% of the population live on or near open sewage. Again, that's not intentional. If you've read in the news recently, reported from credible news sources from both ends of the spectrum, that Israel has now opened the sewage line so that the sewage just flows openly into Gaza. That's biological warfare. 76% of the hospitals have been destroyed. Of the 24% remaining, they operate at a capacity that would be equivalent to a veterinarian's office here in the United States. No vaccines, no medications. Doctors are performing surgeries in Gaza on children with no pain medication. Children. What I witnessed with my own eyes in Gaza was everything that I just explained to you. Furthermore, under my specific experience with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, as many of you may have heard that organization, They've somewhat gone into a hibernation or hiding period. They left Gaza, but they are still in Israel waiting for the next lucrative contract to come. They're waiting for the resort rebuild, the Gaza Riviera. It's been called that.
Yeah.
One thing that struck me as very odd and concerning is that when we were in Israel preparing to conduct operations of humanitarian assistance, humanitarian aid, I was there at the ground floor. We had not conducted operations yet. I was there in the beginning. I saw it fail from the beginning, and it failed throughout its execution. And it's an organization and a mechanism to replace humanitarian aid with a privatized mechanism that the world should not allow that. But in that, there was a map in the Israeli liaison office from the Coordinating Office of the Governance of the Territories. It's called COGAT. COGAT controls everything that goes in and out of Gaza, everything. So when the conversation is that the UN isn't going in, or the UN refuses to go in, or that the UN doesn't have the capacity to go in, that is a lie. That is an absolute lie. I have seen the stacks of requests for organizations, to include mine and others, to go into Gaza that is denied by COGAT. They control all of it. And there was a map on the wall that had this rendering, if you will, like you would see a real estate developer with a rendering of what a future neighborhood would look like if they're building new homes, of this Gaza Riviera, high-speed rail, golf courses, resorts, a Riviera built through the center of Gaza via a canal of which the Salah ad-Din Road would be carved out of. Not only is this a genocide, this is an ethnocide in terms of trying to erase Palestinian history and culture. It's a small point to make, but the Salah ad-Din Road that runs through the middle of Gaza that connects Egypt all the way up into Lebanon has been there since 479 BC. It is a part of our world history, and it has been erased, gone, dug out of the ground, and it's not on maps anymore. And that's where the Riviera will be built. The problem that I saw when seeing that plan is that that plan was developed in 2021. Not after October 7th, 2023. Not in 2024, when we felt that we had to go in and the United States had to produce this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. 2 years before. That's concerning. And US lawmakers knew of it and were a part of it, funded it. One of the biggest arguments of pushback that I will get when I speak to members of Congress, bicameral, bipartisan, is, well, it's a bad situation, but that's war. It's not true. International humanitarian law, laws of armed conflict, laws of land warfare, the protocols of the Geneva Convention, and what I would like for everyone to recognize further, and that lawmakers need to be reminded of, is that Israel is a signatory to the protocols of the Geneva Convention. 1952, they signed on. Not forcefully, agreeably, because they don't want what's happening to ever happen to them. But they have no problem inflicting it on others. When we talk about intent, we need no further to go than the leaders of Israel themselves. Bezalel Smotrich, Minister of Finance. There is nothing such as a Palestinian state. There is nothing such as a Palestinian people. He said these words. These are his quotes, not taken out of context. Wipe them all out. He wasn't talking about Hamas. He's talking about the entire population. Starvation in Gaza is justified. Itamar Ben-Gvir, many of you have seen him on the news. We need to kill more of them. Give us more bombs. We will use them. Netanyahu, there never will be a Palestinian state. He said this in the UN. This isn't even behind closed doors. He says the quiet part out loud. So to think that there is not intent would be a disingenuous argument. To think that all of the conditions of what has occurred in Gaza and is further occurring in the West Bank, to deny that it's a genocide is irresponsible. To look at what is happening to the plight of the Palestinian people, and what I think is important is to take away, just remove all titles of politics or ethnicity or ethno-racial recognition or just human beings. Just the title of human being. It is atrocious what is happening in front of the eyes of the world. It will not stop unless the world, and quite frankly, the United States having a big part of that responsibility, stops it. It will not stop. We know that the objective, both militarily and strategically, the objective for Israel in Gaza is to forcefully evict or force conditions that are so deplorable that Palestinians themselves leave. Either way, it's forced displacement, which is a violation of the Geneva Convention, is a violation of international humanitarian law. The weaponization of food. When the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation came in with the promise to replace the United Nations mechanism, the United Nations had 400 distribution sites. These distribution sites were community-based distribution sites, food kitchens, vaccinations, medical assessments in the neighborhoods where the people were. When the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation began operating, they had 4. Yes. And out of any given day, only 1 was operating. And all of them were in the far reaches of the south, where there are no Palestinians to receive food. Therefore, if you are a Palestinian and you are starving, you have a choice. Make the journey 8 to 10 kilometers on foot through a war zone. Minefields, barbed wire, shooting, snipers, ambushes, tanks, to get food, or you starve to death. And when you make that journey to get that food, you never go home. As they cleared sections of Mawasi, Khan Yunis, Rafah, Berij, as families were moved from various neighborhoods, today's your day to go get food. Head south. If you survive the journey and you get there, 50-50 chance there'd be any food left at all. When it's time to leave the distribution site, you get herded over to a UN encampment. Never go home. The United States, not only as a part of that, the United States designed that plan. The displacement of the population to these distribution sites through military corridors, directly through the areas of operational combat zones, to sites that were designed for maximum, what I would call, if I were to look at these distribution sites without having context as to what they were, just on a map, as a military practitioner in my former life, I would look at these and I would say, that is exactly how you would establish an engagement area to kill the enemy. These were not distribution sites for humanitarian aid. They were designed to kill. And many kill they did. I feel that it's important that I continue to speak to anyone and everyone that wants to hear a firsthand account that isn't veiled in incentive or in some kind of personal gain from this. I personally gain nothing from this other than humanity in my soul. And I'm encouraged that more and more Americans want to hear what's going on, which tells me that people are starting to realize that there's more to it than we've been told over the last many years, that it is a genocide. It is ethnic cleansing, and it is also a genocide. And that we, as the United States, there's a lot that we can do to put an end to it, starting with us demanding it. Over the last week, I went from LA to St. Louis to Chicago, Boston, New York City, DC, New Hampshire, Boston last night, back here this morning. And I will continue to talk to anyone across the United States that wants to have the conversation and hear the truth. Because to be told that oh, we can all take a breather, there's a ceasefire, that is a dangerous, dangerous narrative. It's not a ceasefire. To be told that the 20-point peace and prosperity plan will soon be enacted and that peace will come to the Middle East is a lie. The 20-point peace and prosperity plan has not been agreed to by Israel, nor in any aspect of it does it talk about recognition of the Palestinian people. Does it talk about humanitarian aid and assistance at scale? Does it talk about who's responsible for the reconstruction? Does it talk about what type of diplomatic or political solution that we will have to ensure that this does not continue? To go back to a status quo of this apartheid occupation of the Palestinian people will only lead to further resistance. And when I say that, some people say, well, that's the problem. The Palestinian resistance is the problem. And I'm someone that prefers to venture on the side of facts, not opinions. So I would go and I tell them, well, the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 194 specifically states that it is enshrined the right of return of all Palestinian refugees and their descendants to the expelled land from the Nakba. Enshrined. The US signed on to that. You cannot have a UN General Assembly without the United States signing on to it. We're part of the 5 permanent members. Can't. So to say that we don't support that is a lie. UN General Assembly Resolution 242. The withdrawal of all Israeli forces from the occupied territories of the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. Has that happened? No. That was 1967. When are we going to do it? What are we waiting for? 1978 UN General Resolution 3324, reaffirming the legitimacy of resistance to occupation in the occupied territories to include armed struggle. Resistance is not the problem, occupation is the problem. The United States has a responsibility and an obligation to behave responsibly as a nation with the authority of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations. When China, Russia, France, the United Kingdom all look at us and say, man, y'all are off track. That should concern us as a nation. So oftentimes when I speak, I try to focus on the facts. I try to focus on the objective, refrain from the subjective, because that often leads into emotional arguments. But I will say that from a subjective position, that I stand with the people of Palestine. I stand with the Palestinian people, and I am confident. It may not be tomorrow, and it may not be next week. It likely will not break ground and actually move forward towards anything of measurable progress until there is a new administration in the office. But there will be a free Palestine.
Thank you.
To not would mean that the world would have to, 1, disavow all international laws, that the world would have to reverse years of UN General Assembly resolution, and that the world would have to stand by and acknowledge that international order doesn't exist anymore. And I don't think the world will stand for that. Right now, the United States is the biggest supporter of a UN General Assembly resolution through the Security Council to be proposed to the General Assembly to request and allow an international peacekeeping force to go into Gaza, what you would see as the blue helmets. You've heard that term. It strikes me as odd is that for months and months and months and months and months, that every UN General Assembly resolution that's come to the floor of the UN for a ceasefire, the United States has been the sole country to veto it. But now, the United States is begging for a UN General Assembly resolution to send an international peacekeeping force. Turkey stood up and said, we'll help. And we said no. Why? Because Israel didn't want it. Turkey's a NATO ally. Israel is not an ally. And I don't say that as hyperbole. The United States State Department does not recognize Israel as an ally of the United States. They were a close strategic partner, not an ally. Yet we are willing to turn our back on one of our longest allies of NATO. Why? Because Israel said so. That should concern us all as Americans. Recently, the United States sent U.S. Central Command, the headquarters of U.S. Central Command. U.S. Central Command is a 4-star combatant command. It's a 4-star general. In this case, the current commander is a Navy admiral. And sent him to go to Israel to keep an eye on things, to fix the situation. And sent along with him a joint force of 200 U.S. service members. And when they first were sent in, they were going to stay in a headquarters just outside of Gaza in Israel, just near the town of Sderot. And they were going to simply provide civil-military coordination. Well, now they go in and out of Gaza every day. What's next? Soon they will be stationed in Gaza. And we all know that when the United States puts boots on the ground somewhere, it doesn't go away. Ask me how I know. Spent 21 years in Iraq, 20 years in Afghanistan. I was there when we were fighting Al-Qaeda in the hills of the Tora Bora with the Northern Alliance, and I was there when the last aircraft flew out of Kaya, Hamid Karzai International Airport. Saw it from beginning to end. And who's in power in Afghanistan now? The same people we tried to overthrow for 20 years. You know, when I got on an aircraft and was leaving, the United States force commander on the ground, a general officer, was communicating with the Taliban because we were negotiating with the Taliban to please allow us to leave safely without being shot out of the sky. This is a fact, not joking, because ISIS Khorasan had taken over the city. So we asked the Taliban to please secure the airfield so that when we left, we wouldn't be shot out of the sky. How would that look for American foreign policy? And this gentleman that was standing there and looked at us, and you know, he was older, grizzled, looked like he'd seen a lot. And this man, as a young child, had fought the Soviets. And as he stood there and watched us get on this airplane and beg for our safety, he said, "You Americans, you own all the watches, but we own all the time." And it's true. United States military involvement in Gaza will be temporary, and we will leave it worse. The answer must be an international approach with a coalition of Arab nations in the region that have a vested interest to continue American colonialism, to continue to pull the U.S. into wars that have no objective. Later in my career, when I was in Syria, I thought to myself, man, we are just chasing U.S. policy around the desert, trying to figure out what it is. It's no different now. 1 year ago, if you would have asked any general officer or flag officer in the United States military, would we have U.S. troops in Gaza? The answer would have been, oh, you're ridiculous. Here we are. Didn't take long. It's something that we have to maintain pressure on our politicians and on our lawmakers We have to maintain pressure through organizations that advocate. We have to maintain pressure on the Congress, one, to let them know that we're paying attention, but two, to let them know that we demand accountability and representation of what we as the people want, not what they will stumble ourselves into. If anybody were to tell me, rest assured, Pete Hegseth's got it, that would concern me. So that concludes my piece, sir.
Right. Thank you, Tony, for truly a compelling and a profound presentation, so loaded with information, and there's so much to unpack, which we will do during the Q&A. Our next panelist, Greg. Greg Mokhiber is an international human rights lawyer, writer, public speaker, activist, former senior United Nations official, and a member of the Gaza People's Tribunal. He left the UN in October 2023, penning a widely read letter that warned of genocide in Gaza, which we, of course, we see now, criticized the international response and called for a new international human rights movement, including 30 plus years at the UN. He's a former director of the New York office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, held senior UN positions in Geneva, New York, and in the field, and undertook human rights missions to dozens of countries. He has served as UN Senior Human Rights Advisor in Palestine and in Afghanistan, was chief staff of the high-level mission in Darfur, headed the Rule of Law and Democracy Unit, and served as chief of the Economic and Social Issues section and chief of the Development and Economic and Social Issues branch at OHCHR headquarters. He spent 5 years as the chairman of the UN Task Force for Action, and later chaired the UN Democracy Fund Consultative Group, the UN Working Group on Leadership, the UN Consultative Group on Inequalities, and the Steering Committee of the UN Human Rights Mainstreaming Fund. He served on the UN Gender Task Team 2023 and led several initiatives aimed at integrating human rights into the work of the United Nations itself. I mean, he's done so many things, but I think I'm going to end it right there, Craig, so we can go on with your presentations and not take away from that. So please go ahead. Thank you. Please. Hey, quiet.
Thank you, Saeed. Thank you so much. That was more than enough. Thank you very much. It's so nice to be with you again, Saeed, and nice to be on another panel with Anthony, whose moral clarity and courage I very much appreciate. We all know what happens when you challenge the beast, and one can only imagine the slings and arrows to which Anthony is being subjected, and yet his moral clarity is undimmed, and we should all be thankful for that. Well, I also want to thank the organizers of this session for giving it the title Challenging Genocide, because I think one of the many disturbing distinctions of this genocide has been the degree to which it has been perpetrated without challenge from official institutions of the state, from international organizations, major media corporations, and sadly, from far too many of our neighbors. And I also appreciate the use of the present tense in the title, because this is correct. This is not a post facto discussion. This is an ongoing genocide as we meet today. And contrary to the carefully scripted lies of politicians and their enablers, parroted by complicit media corporations, the genocide has not ended. There is no ceasefire, and there is no peace process. Hundreds of Palestinians in Gaza have been murdered by the Israeli regime since the so-called ceasefire was falsely declared a month ago, and hundreds more have been horribly wounded. Hundreds of homes and other civilian structures have been destroyed by the Israeli regime during this period, and thousands of truckloads of food and medicine and shelter and other essentials have been blocked by the regime. Indeed, there has not been a single day since the ceasefire ruse began that Israel has ceased firing or ended its genocidal siege. Not one day. And still, the US and Western politicians and media corporations continue to disseminate this destructive lie. At the same time, the Israeli regime's genocidal attacks and settler pogroms on the West Bank have not only continued unabated, but have in fact accelerated. So anyone who participates in the Trump ceasefire charade at this stage is either deeply naive or willfully complicit in the strategy of distraction that's being deployed by the US and Israel in order to hide the continuing genocide, to consolidate control of Gaza, and to normalize the Israeli regime, even as it drips with the fresh blood of innocents. And so the genocide continues. And the roots of this genocide in Palestine run deep through a century of racist colonization, the Nakba of 1947 and 1948, 8 decades of apartheid, 58 years of brutal occupation, and generations of persecution and exile. And for the past 2 years, the world has watched in horror as the Israeli regime planned, announced, perpetrated, and celebrated the accelerated genocide of the Palestinian people. Adding to the horror of this historic atrocity has been the ruthless complicity of so many governments, media corporations, weapons and tech companies, and Israel proxy groups planted among the populations of the West. Indeed, even some neighboring Arab governments have forever stained their legacy through complicity with the US-Israel axis in the perpetration of genocide. And the absolute failure of international institutions, international diplomacy, and international law to mobilize an effective response to the genocide has shattered 80 years of hope for a post-war global order dedicated to the proposition of never again. The unprecedented nature of this genocide has been driven home by so many terrifying firsts. The first live-stream genocide, witnessed by millions around the world. The first high-tech genocide, perpetrated with state-of-the-art weapon systems, killer drones, autonomous weapons, surveillance technologies, and artificial intelligence. And the first globalized genocide, perpetrated with the direct and enthusiastic participation of so many governments, foremost among them the United States, the United Kingdom, and Germany. The active complicity of so many corporations and organizations across the globe. And Zionist repression extending far beyond the shores of Palestine, with complicit Western institutions using state power to oppress and silence all who dare to speak out. At the same time, in just 2 years, the Israeli regime has shattered record after bloody record for the murder of several categories of protected persons, including medical personnel, journalists, aid workers, UN staff, and children, as well as one of the highest civilian casualty rates ever recorded. And it has achieved the dubious distinction of creating the widest global consensus on the perpetration of the crime of genocide ever recorded in real time, with declarations of genocide issued by the UN's Commission of Inquiry, its independent human rights rapporteurs, leading international human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, leading Palestinian and Israeli human rights organizations, the leading association of genocide scholars and international lawyers across the world. And indeed, this was an easy consensus to reach, because this is quintessential genocide. Its genocidal intent declared out loud by Israeli leaders from the start, followed by a horrific catalog of genocidal acts carried out with a violence as ruthless as it is systematic. Neighborhood after neighborhood, town after town, hospital after hospital, school after school, shelter after shelter, church after church, mosque after mosque, field after field, food store after food store, and refugee camp after refugee camp. 2 years of siege, blocking aid, food, water, medicine, fuel, and every essential of human life. A chain of massacres, mass abductions, torture camps, sexual violence, intentionally imposed disease and starvation. Palestinian toddlers shot by snipers for sport. Palestinian captives tortured to death. Gaza reduced to a moonscape. This, in sum, is the genocide of genocides. And yet, it continues unobstructed. As such, we are living in an exceptionally dark moment in history. This is our Gramscian time of monsters, an age that has given birth to the monster of Israeli genocide, suckled it with Western complicity, and swaddled it in a blanket of exceptionalism. Now fully grown, heavily armed, driven by a deeply racist and fundamentally violent ideology, and drunk with impunity, this Frankenstein monster is rampaging across Western Asia and beyond, leaving repression, blood, and destruction everywhere in its wake. And this is an age in which all of the rules of humanity adopted since the horrors of the Second World War are being dismantled piece by piece in order to ensure the impunity of this one oppressive foreign regime, even as it perpetrates a live stream genocide. But Palestine is not alone in the crosshairs. In fact, a blueprint is being drawn up in Palestine for a dystopian future of total repression across the globe, a plan to erase moral and legal red lines, to deploy repressive new technologies, to profit from bloodletting, and to unleash brutal forces against all who resist, dissent, or stand in their way. The front lines of this horrifying global shift are situated squarely in Palestine, but its ultimate trajectory extends beyond Palestine, beyond Western Asia, and into our own communities, including right here in the United States. Already, the Israeli regime has imposed colonization, apartheid, and genocide on the people of Palestine. It unlawfully occupies territory in Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria. It continually perpetrates acts of aggression against Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Yemen. It has bombed humanitarian ships in Maltese and Tunisian waters, attacked and pirated humanitarian flotillas, and abducted and abused their crews, assassinated people across the region, carried out a transnational terror attack with booby-trapped pagers in Lebanon and Syria. It has attacked United Nations convoys and compounds, schools and clinics, food stores and supplies, and it has abducted, tortured, and murdered hundreds and hundreds of United Nations staff. And it has also exported its repression to Western capitals, both through the corruption of Western politicians and agencies and through the mobilization of Zionist harassment groups set up across the West to persecute all who dared to speak up against the rampaging monster. In the United States, Canada, the UK, Germany, and beyond, students are smeared by university administrations, suspended, expelled, beaten by police, arrested, and even deported simply for speaking out against the genocide and the regime perpetrating it. Human rights defenders and peace activists and journalists are smeared and brutalized and arrested. Free speech rights are canceled. Free association and assembly are canceled. Academic freedom is canceled. The right to defend human rights itself is canceled. As corrupted Western governments mobilize the awesome power of the state to attack their own citizens on behalf of this one brutal, oppressive foreign regime. But we should not be surprised. This is the inevitable product of the erasure of moral and legal red lines abroad. Aimé Césaire, in his Discourse on Colonialism, demonstrated an important truth, that fascism is colonialism applied at home. Sins perpetrated abroad, if allowed to proceed unchallenged, inevitably come back home. The proof of this is everywhere around us today. The horrors perpetrated by the US and its allies in Palestine and in countries across the globe are now coming home. The repression, the violence, the racist bloodlust, the silencing of dissent, the enthusiastic support for genocide, the masked armed men breaking down doors in the middle of the night here in the US in the name of the state, the bombing of fishing boats in the Caribbean. This is how impunity works. The more it is allowed to consume, the more its hunger grows. With each successive crime committed by the US empire, the Israeli regime, or the complicit Western allies, their desire for blood and conquest expands. It is spread across Western Asia, across the Caribbean, and now it's spreading across the US itself. And with each successive step, it moves the red lines further and further over the boundaries of human rights and of human decency. We allow it to continue unchecked at our own peril. And let us recognize, if genocide is not a red line, then there are no red lines. And the next knock at the door could be at your home. Left to its own devices, the repressive arm of the state pulls in only one direction. And here in the United States, both major political parties are agents of the same oligarchic power structure. That means the only check on their power and on its abuse is us. But how did we get here? We got here because the US, UK, and the broader West have ensured absolute impunity for the Israeli regime for 80 years, carving out an Israel exception to international law. Because repression builds on repression in a cycle that's fueled by impunity. At the same time, here inside the United States, the precedents since the 1960s of neoliberal mass deprivation, unchallenged, led to the race-based mass incarceration of the drug war, which led to the systematic abductions, torture, extrajudicial executions, and discrimination of the war on terrorism. And they have now led to the campaign of Zionist repression being conducted across our country and against our communities, especially against Muslims and Arabs and Palestinians, and against students and human rights defenders speaking out against Israeli apartheid and genocide. All with the complicity of the media corporations, the Wall Street robber barons, the Silicon Valley dystopianists, the Israel lobby, and the war machine. Each of these unchecked abuses has represented an ever-expanding ripple of repression, and no Congress or president, Republican or Democrat, has worked to reverse these abusive trends. Rather, each has helped to entrench and expand them, either for cash donations from their donors or for their own nefarious purposes. As a result, we are now spiraling rapidly down a vortex of fascism. Many official checks on abuse of power have been weakened or entirely dismantled, and there is no force on earth that can or will stop this decline but us. Still, there have been historic cracks in the wall of Israeli impunity. Today, the Israeli regime is on trial for genocide in the International Court of Justice. Its leaders are indicted for crimes against humanity in the International Criminal Court. Last September, the UN General Assembly adopted a historic resolution incorporating the conclusions of the ICJ, demanding an end to the Israeli regime's assault on Gaza and setting a one-year deadline for the regime to end its unlawful occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. And findings of genocide have been issued by UN Special Rapporteurs, the UN Commission of Inquiry, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, leading Palestinian human rights organizations like PCHR and El-Haq, leading Israeli human rights organizations like B'Tselem and PHRI, by the International Association of Genocide Scholars, by the Gaza Tribunal, and by leading international lawyers across the globe. And most importantly, by the people of the world, who in their millions have risen up, as indicated in the title of this program, to challenge genocide. From the people's encampments on college campuses, to the people's demonstrations in capitals around the globe, to the people's tribunals pursuing justice, the people's legal initiatives like the Hind Rajab Foundation, Palestine Legal, and the Center for Constitutional Rights, the people's march across the Sinai, the people's flotillas sailing in the Mediterranean to break the siege. The BDS and anti-apartheid movements are growing and achieving important successes. And a proposal is circulating that would use the UN General Assembly Uniting for Peace mechanism to circumvent the US veto, adopt concrete measures to hold Israel to account, and deploy a consent-based protection force to Gaza. For the first time in its bloody history, the Israeli regime has been facing the possibility of real accountability for its crimes. But we should remember that the regime's friends are also well aware of this growing drumbeat for accountability. And because of this, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, and the UN human rights mechanisms are under attack by Israeli, US, and Western spy agencies, slander campaigns, and even official US sanctions. And in advance of the UNGA deadline in September, they mobilized to adopt a strategy to forestall any additional measures that might bring real accountability to Israel or real protection for the Palestinians. 8 days before the deadline expired, they adopted the French-Saudi plan, dubbed the New York Declaration. That plan ignores the genocide, ignores the apartheid, makes no provisions for accountability for the perpetrators or redress for the victims, proposes a proxy occupation force of Gaza, and seeks to reimpose on the Palestinian people a new Oslo-style paradigm under which they are left to negotiate for their rights with their oppressor. Shortly thereafter, Donald Trump introduced his even more baldly colonial plan for Gaza in the form of an imperial dictate that would deploy a Trump-headed proxy occupation, normalize the perpetrator of genocide, guarantee its further impunity, and further punish its victims and survivors. And at this moment, diplomats in the UN Security Council are working to merge the atrocious French-Saudi proxy occupation plan with the Trump colonial plan, to which they would intend to place a UN stamp of approval in what would be just the latest UN betrayal of the Palestinian people. Clearly, justice is unlikely to come from official institutions, whether national or international, if they are left to their own devices. Instead, the demand, the engine of justice, must come from the people, from the resistance and steadfastness of the Palestinian people, and from the unwavering and active solidarity of the rest of us. It must come from ever-increasing efforts for boycott, divestment, sanctions, judicial prosecutions of perpetrators, education of our communities, mass demonstrations, civil disobedience and direct action, and in general, wherever we are, in every forum, in public spaces and private, from our refusal to normalize Zionism, colonialism, apartheid, and genocide. And if you have been listening to the growing roar from the street, you will know that this is just what is happening today. People are standing up in record numbers, and despite the efforts of complicit governments and Israel regime proxies to silence them, to say that this is not normal, it is not okay, it will not be allowed in our name, and we will mobilize to stop it. Their job, and ours, is to awaken a nation and a world that is erasing moral red lines, tolerating genocide, and sleepwalking into fascism. Yes, the hour is late. Yes, the threat is real. Yes, the obstacles are daunting. But we are not powerless unless we believe ourselves to be so. As Nelson Mandela said, it's always impossible until it's done. But let me finish by returning to Aimé Césaire, who also taught us, and I quote, "When tyranny becomes law, rebellion becomes duty." This is our duty, to rebel, to challenge this repression in every way we can, to stop the slide into barbarism and then to reverse it, to draw a red line in the sand against genocide, colonialism, and fascism, and for human rights, equality, and peace. We have named our enemy. It is impunity, and it must be vanquished. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick. Victory is never guaranteed, but defeat is certain if we do not fight back. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Again, I mean, as always, you know, your presentations are informative, thorough, and really spotlight the issues that ought to be, you know, always spotlighted. I mean, I love that the duty to rebel. I mean, we should all be endowed with that. We will have, you know, maybe 15 minutes for Q's and A's. So we have very short time. I want to begin by asking you a question, Tony. Now, I remember when GHF came into being, the discussion for it, it was always shrouded in mystery. It was like, you know, how organized crime, how the mafia does things and so on. Nobody knew what they are. Nobody knew who's going to, because I go to the State Department, I went to the State Department most every day and so on. And we asked these issues, who's financing it? Until today, we don't know who the heck have financed it. They told us one day that $30 million have been committed. Then they said, no, we only sent 15 million. The president insisted time after time that we gave $60 million. He insisted on that figure. You know, of course, that's his thing. And, you know, and you basically, you know, underline that the plan for Gaza goes back to 2021. It's not something that happened all of a sudden. So educate us, if you will, on how it is financed, who was behind it, how did the aid come in? And, and really very, very fearful and compelling, the fact that, distribution of aid went down from 400 centers in Gaza to 4 centers that, at any given time, there was one working. So,
That is a great question, and that in and of itself can be an entirely panel of its own, but I'll try to consolidate my answer in that you're right. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation operated much like an organized crime syndicate. The individual that was put in charge of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation when it was founded, and again, this is not an organization that has historical roots in humanitarian aid and assistance. It was created in March. It was created to address a problem that didn't exist. We created a problem to have the company then respond to it. The person who put in charge of it was a man named Jake Wood.
Yeah.
Jake Wood, his background was in the origins of Blackwater, Triple Canopy, and then an organization called the Constellas, which was operating in Israel at the time. Not humanitarian aid organizations. Those are the opposite. On the 26th of May, on the very first day that we conducted operations, as we were loading up to go in to Gaza, the first bit of humanitarian aid to go into Gaza since the ceasefire ended in March, Jake Wood stepped down from the foundation with his official statement saying, I can no longer be a part of this because it will not be done in a humanitarian way. This was Jake Wood that said this. So yeah, that was kind of like a head scratching moment. Like, what are we doing? A lot of the contractors that I was there with resigned, and I stayed on. I felt if everyone's jumping ship, someone's got to row. Because who's gonna feed the Palestinians? What are we going to do? And then when the person 2 weeks later stood up as the new chairman, someone that I had never heard of, an individual named Johnny Moore, who is a self-proclaimed evangelical Christian Zionist. I didn't give him that title. That's what he calls himself. Again, not steeped in humanitarian aid and assistance. He has since stepped down. He's now right down the street here in Pepperdine as the vice chancellor. The question of who funds it, where's the money coming from, is a great question. And in fact, the truth is the United States government doesn't even know. When I returned from Gaza and I had an interview with Tucker Carlson, members of the U.S. State Department and the Office of the Inspector General of the USAID. USAID does still exist in administrative structure. It no longer exists in the ability to operate around the world. But I was contacted by them both, the inspectors general from both the State Department and USAID, asking me, do you know what happened to the money that was given to GHF? I was like, you're asking me? Like, it's asking a child what happened to the mortgage payment. I don't know. So when we talked and they were asking me questions, it became clearer and clearer and clearer that the $30 million grant that was given to the GHF from USAID, State Department through USAID, that there's no accountability of what happened to that money. The understanding of that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was purchasing food to then deliver into Gaza is a lie. And I know this for a fact because when we were there, I asked myself after the first 2 days of distribution, if the UN was providing 550 trucks a day and we're providing 12, how are we going to increase to that magnitude of 550 trucks a day at 400 sites? I mean, we're nowhere close. So when I asked, the answer from the supervisors over me was, well, we don't know, that's not our problem. Well, whose problem is it? So I went to Ashdod, which is the port in Israel where the aid was coming into from various private donors from organizations around the world. And when I got there, GHF was not purchasing food. GHF was taking the food that was provided to the United Nations, that the United Nations was no longer to take in. World Food Program, World Food Kitchen, Rahman, other international donors, International Red Cross, Red Crescent. And they were taking a percentage of that off and just putting a GHF sticker on it. Now it becomes GHF food. They weren't buying it. So what happened to that money? I don't know. Then it was probably August timeframe as more and more attention was being given to the failure of GHF. Kogat then demanded that any and all food that the GHF delivered into Gaza must be purchased through Israeli companies. That's a fact. I mean, you can see this in the news. This is credible sources. So it seemed to me that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which really isn't a thing, it's like an idea that can just morph and become new things. The GHF right now still exists. It is still an entity. What I fear, because of that amount of secrecy and veil and this crime syndicate-like approach, is that GHF is going to pop up again as a construction company, because they had all the foundations underneath it of which to operate as such. The subcontract components to it were Safe Reach Solutions, a construction company in Israel that is run by the former ground branch director of the CIA. That's who you want doing humanitarian aid. And then UG Solutions out of North Carolina, of which I was recruited by, where the contract in Israel was under the direction of the national president of the Infidels Motorcycle Club, another organization that you really want doing humanitarian aid. So when you look at these structures that are still in place today, they're still in place. They are sitting in Israel awaiting the signatures of what's going to happen for the reconstruction. Jared Kushner has met with them, bringing them into the future plan. If responsible adults and humanitarians who do humanitarian aid, humanitarian operations require deep understanding. As a military professional who's been trained in the application of force through the military, if you were to just take someone and say, oh, shooting a gun's easy, you can do it, we would be aghast. Humanitarian aid, humanitarian operations require expertise, structures to do it. GHF's failure in Gaza is a clear example of that, but the structure still exists. So to your question, I don't know where the money went. We don't know where the money came from. The United States government doesn't know where the money came from. But when you look back in July, when the Swiss bank, the Switzerland said, you can't operate in our banking system because you're just too shady. I mean, what? It tells its own story. The story tells itself. So, yes, great questions. Where's the money come from? I don't know. Neither does the United States government, or at least officials. I'm sure somebody knows. How will it continue? I don't know, but the kind of the nefariousness of paramilitary contracting, like your Blackwater or your Triple Canopy or your Constellas, etc., is that they can become anything. You need someone. They morph. You need someone to build a table? I can build a table. You need someone to go to war? I can go to war. They can become anything because there's no requirements of which they are, because they're private. So yes, that is something that to this day is still a deep concern of mine, is that soon we are going to see the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation reemerge as a rebuilding company. And why I think that is that when you look at the 400 distribution sites that were throughout the entirety of Gaza, the 4 sites that were established, one that was quickly then shut down, handed back over to the IDF near the Netzarim corridor south of Gaza City. The 3 sites that remained were in the far, far, far south. Why? If you're only going to have 3 sites, wouldn't you want to put them where it was needed? Why? Why those 3 sites? To me, it became nothing more than a real estate grabbing opportunity to where possession is 9/10 of the law. Hold the terrain. GHF still owns that property, which is absurd.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know the answers to that question, and neither does the United States government who gave them the money. And I fear that they are going to morph into something that is going to be used as a further tool of oppression and a mechanism to control the land under this auspice of rebuilding.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Greg, I have a very quick question before we turn to our anxious audience who want to pose the questions. I wanted to ask you about the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who has not said it was a genocide as of yet. Although you both, in fact, Greg and Tony mentioned COGAT, and COGAT basically keeps record on every child, every Palestinian, every person, everyone. They know exactly where everyone lives, where they are at any given time, and so on. So the intention is there. Now, they talk about intent and all this thing that, you have to have the intent, although we do have the evidence that, the genocide was not only intended, but it was well planned. I want to ask you, why do you think, until this moment, the Secretary General of the United Nations has not uttered the word genocide? I mean, we understand why the New York Times does not want to use that word, but why does the Secretary General of the UN?
Yeah, the New York Times doesn't want to use that word because they are complicit in the genocide.
Right.
And complicity is a crime under international law.
Right.
The Secretary General of the United Nations won't use the word genocide for one reason, and that reason is fear. There's never been a situation where, as the genocide is being perpetrated, there has been such a strong global consensus that what is happening is genocide. And the Secretary General has been on notice of this since October of 2023. He knows perfectly well the reports that come in from the Human Rights Office, he reads the press, he knows exactly. I myself, rang the genocide alarm in October of 2023. But he's afraid. He's afraid of the Israelis, he's afraid of the Americans, he's afraid of the Brits, he's afraid of the Germans. And he tries to walk a very careful line. And that line forces him to abdicate his normative responsibilities in the organization on behalf of political caution. So what they've done is they've developed this rhetorical trick in the United Nations where if they're asked about it, they will say, and if you listen, you'll hear this over and over again throughout this genocide. They'll say only a court can determine if it's genocide. Now, what's interesting about that is that's something you can say about any crime, right? You can say that about executions. You can say that about torture. You can say that about terrorism. He does not hesitate to use. Just 2 days ago, he issued a statement after an incident saying it was terrorism. So he doesn't need to wait for a court to tell him that a particular crime is being perpetrated, unless it's a crime being perpetrated by powerful governments that will make him pay for his honesty. And so he says only a court can determine genocide in order to avoid stating the obvious and then suffering the repercussions. It's also an abdication of his responsibilities of prevention, because remember, the Genocide Convention is the convention on the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide. And if you wait a couple of years down the road for a court to decide, you have already failed in your duty of prevention. It's impossible to prevent after the fact. So this is an abdication. It's based upon fear of pressure, especially from the United States. It's based upon fear of campaigns by Israel proxy groups that will label him an anti-Semite and a supporter of terrorism if he defends the human rights of the Palestinian people. It's based upon fear of threatening the money that comes from the Germans and the European Union and the UK. And so he has abdicated his responsibilities. Indeed, the UN has failed miserably. This organization that I dedicated 32 years of my life to has failed miserably. At the very least, the Secretary General and other senior officials, by the way, you wouldn't know that there is an office on the prevention of genocide that reports to the Secretary General that has been silent on the genocide throughout. The High Commissioner of Human Rights has refused to call out the genocide up until this day. The senior officials across the organization reporting to the Secretary General have refused to do so. That is failure by abdication. Right? They have deferred to political expediency and to powerful states, and in the process, abandoning not just the victims and survivors of the genocide, but the norms and standards of the organization itself, the Charter, the Universal Declaration, the binding human rights treaties that they are charged with following up on there. Now, the UN has also failed due to design in some cases. The most obvious case there is the veto in the Security Council. That's failure by design. The U.S. has, used its veto over and over again, I think 6 times during the genocide. 50 times the U.S. has used its veto just to protect Israeli impunity. And so the Security Council fails by design. The Council has done nothing to stop the genocide. It's done nothing to hold the perpetrators accountable. It's done nothing to provide protection for the victims of the genocide. It continues to recognize Israel's credentials, even as it murders UN staff, destroys UN compounds, violates UN rules over and over again. That's failure by design. Then you've got the General Assembly, which is a more mixed bag. And there in the General Assembly, they've done some important things. They've called for ceasefires. They've convened under Uniting for Peace. They adopted a historic resolution in September of 2024, codifying the findings of the International Court of Justice and giving a 1-year deadline to the Israeli regime to comply with what the International Court of Justice has found. But that deadline expired in the middle of September, and nothing has happened to hold Israel accountable because Israel's friends in the United Nations have mobilized to prevent accountability for Israel and to prevent redress for the Palestinians. And that's where you get these terrible colonial plans of the French, Saudi, New York Declaration, the Trump 20-point colonial plan, and now what they are discussing in the Security Council. The UN has dropped the ball. They've all been on notice, at least since last year, when the International Court of Justice raised the risk of genocide, said that genocide was plausible, and ordered Israel to stop its actions. And remember, the International Court of Justice is also a part of the UN system. And yet, instead of listening to the International Court of Justice, to the UN's own Human Rights Commission of Inquiry, its own special rapporteurs, its own staff, they've chosen instead to follow the orders of powerful member states and pressure lobbies, and to abandon the victims and to abandon the norms and standards of the organization.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Now we are going to turn to you, our great audience, to pose your questions. Please formulate it in the form of a question, or if you have a comment, make sure that it's a brief comment. So I'll start with Dr. Maysoon, right here, and so right there. Thank you. And then we'll move on. Yeah.
Mr. Arikat, thank you so much for an excellent panel. My question goes to Mr. Anthony. Have you received any invitation in any church in the United States to talk about what you told us? How we, as citizens of this country, can help fellow citizens understand what they don't like to see done in the name of Americans?
So the direct answer to the question is yes. In fact, over the last 3 days, speaking at both the Community Church of Boston, St. Cecilia's Catholic Church of Boston, the Community Church of New Hampshire and Durham. I've spoken at synagogues, mosques, Catholic churches, non-denominational churches. People want to hear the truth, or at least feel like they're informed, that isn't through some kind of biased mouthpiece. So yes, there are those that are listening. When I spoke at St. Cecilia's Catholic Church, there are those in the religious community that understand that what is happening is not in line with any type of religious teachings or values, regardless of what you believe. It's wrong. It's wrong. So I was one time invited to speak at a very affluent community in Southern Florida, in the Villages, kind of going into the Lion's Den. And yeah, there was good conversation. And I will say this to anyone around the world or our country that wants to have this discussion, is that I will have that discussion. I have made the decision before I stepped into this, that knowing, for 25 years serving in the Army as a hero and a Green Beret and a American patriot, the second I called this a genocide, I became a terrorist. It's a fact. And serious. And you know what? It doesn't bother me. I've decided long ago that with death threats and threats against my life and my family and everything else, that in speaking out anywhere in the world, and the reason I come to things like this and prefer not to do a webinar or a Zoom is to show people that I'm a real person. I guess it went around the internet that I'm AI generated, but so hopefully you can see that I'm not. I'm real, real person. But this is something that I'm willing to die for. Just as for 25 years I was willing to die for the values of our country, I think our values as a nation are on the line, and I will die for it. So more and more are listening. I have, my personal relationship with God is not something to discuss in a panel as such, but I know and I feel that what I'm doing is the right thing. The popular thing is not always the right thing, and I'm okay with that. And years when I first stepped into this, my wife is also an Army veteran, served for a career in the Army, combat veteran. And when I first came home, my wife said to me, we've been married for 18 years. She said, this has bothered you more than anything you've experienced in your military career. And I was fighting in Raqqa in Syria. It's pretty bad. Seen a lot. And she said, for the sake of these people, these Palestinians, these children, these mothers, you have to speak out. You have to. You've seen it. And I said, okay, I will, but I'm going to do it anonymously. And when I said that, my wife paused and she said, I'll support you in whichever you feel that needs to be done. But if you speak out anonymously, you're a coward. And I didn't marry a coward. So my soul and the virtue of our nation is more important than what anyone may think of me as an individual.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good. Very good. Now remember, we're getting close to the next panel. We're cutting through your break time, which is okay. So we'll go make it short. They're right there. No, you go, yeah, and then yeah.
I want to thank Jerusalem Fund for two incredible panelists. But my question for Mr. Aguilar and Mike and my group, chat groups and stuff, we call him Big Tony. You're a global icon. You've become a global icon for our people. And kind of angelic. That's how we view you. And you've just commented on that a little bit. Question is, a year and a half ago, before you saw any of this, and you had 4 years of experience prior to that, what was your approach to these concepts and the work that you had done? And I guess you said that what you saw in the last year was so compelling that it apparently changed how you had viewed the previous 24 years.
So I joined the Army at 17. I wasn't even old enough to vote. When I was fighting on the streets of Mosul, Baghdad, Taji, Sadr City, wasn't even old enough to drink yet, and I was leading an infantry platoon in combat. The youth are easily manipulated. I was one. I went to West Point because I felt like I was living the American dream, apple pie and the American flag, freedom. I was always told at a young age that if we don't fight them there, they will fight us here. Yeah. Years and years and years and years of seeing that with my own eyes and realizing that that's not true. What I've come to realize over the last year and a half, what the resistance of the Palestinian people has shown me. So when people say that I'm brave and courageous, I am not. I am simply a vessel of the story of the Palestinian people. They are brave. To stand up against resistance, overwhelming resistance, and to do so every day when you wake up as a small child, knowing that you might not eat, you might not even survive, and you wake up and you go about your life because living is opposition. Living is resistance. And to me, that is so powerful. And that woke me up to a lot of things to where we're all Palestinian right now because the values that we hold as a nation that built this country are on display. Our administration right now I would describe Trump and the administration under what King Louis XIV, the Sun King, once described himself as "La c'est moi." I am the state. They believe that the state supports and serves them, and it's time that we, the people, take that back. So this has opened my eyes a lot. I started researching about the Nakba, about the UN resolutions that say, you know, what is, because I've asked myself those questions. Why? And educating myself to where not just taking what is the accepted narrative that the Israeli army is the most moral army in the world. As an army officer being told that by a general officer in the army, I was like, what about us? I thought, no, we were the most moral army in the world. Well, other than us, they are. And I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't look like it to me. Doesn't take a moral army to drop a joint deployed area munition from an F-35 onto a school. Doesn't. Cowards, or a church, or a mosque, or a playground, or a hospital, or a daycare. And if somebody had told me, well, that's not true, I've seen it. I've seen it. As you go into Rafah and you drive through the gate of Kerem Shalom and you see the Al-Kuwaiti hospital that is blown to pieces. And the remnants of it are now in Israeli headquarters with a flag draped over it as big as you would see at a football game. That's not a moral army. It's tyranny on display. So, yeah, this is, to me, this has been a great experience of personal growth and understanding of not only the Palestinian resistance and not only what is happening in our world, but also for myself in looking at that it's important to stand on values, not what other people think of you. What other people think of you is popularity. What you think of yourself is character. And I think I'm more invested in character now than what other people might think.
Yes, thank you. I have a question for Craig. I'm very worried about what's happening at the UN now, and I want to thank you for your work on trying to promote a consent-based protection force, but it doesn't seem to be on the table. And so between what the US and the French and Saudis are calling for, is it possible that China and Russia will veto both of those, and will that be a good thing? And what can we as the grassroots be pushing now?
Well, that's our hope at the moment, is that either the Russians or the Chinese or both will block what the United States is trying to do. Where the negotiations will go after that, I don't know. You know, there have been 3 tracks in this process so far. The first track to come up was this movement, first by Palestinian civil society and then by global civil society, to get the General Assembly to convene under the Uniting for Peace mechanism, to adopt a resolution that would have a number of accountability measures for the Israeli regime, including rejection of its credentials, as was done with South Africa, including military embargo, including you know, a whole range of accountability measures, sanctions that could be adopted by the General Assembly, could not be enforced by the General Assembly, but they could be adopted and then provide a platform for other countries to come on board and to implement those sanctions. And then to mandate a protection force on the model of what was done in 1956 under Uniting for Peace in the UN emergency force that deployed to the Sinai. This is something for which there's precedent, it's legal, it's possible. There's a draft resolution, there's a principal sponsor in the government of Colombia. But as you can see, the minute Colombia stepped up to do this, you know, President Petro fell under the attack of the US government, which first, you know, pulled his visa and then began threatening him with everything from sanctions to tariffs to coup d'etat to an invasion to, you know, you name it. That set that process back. And in the meantime, Israel's friends and the US friends have been moving forward on this French-Saudi plan and on the Trump plan, which they are now trying to find a way to merge, which is nothing more than a colonial grab by Donald Trump, Tony Blair, and other discredited international figures to further deny the self-determination of the Palestinian people, to further normalize the Israeli regime, and to further, let's say, cage the Palestinian people in Gaza, and to put them back in the situation where they have to beg the Americans and the Israelis for any crumbs that are thrown to them. This would be a complete reversal of everything that's happened in the last 2 years in the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, the UN human rights mechanisms, and global civil society demanding accountability and saying, the court has said that the Palestinian people do not have to negotiate for their rights, that these rights are inalienable, and that Israel has to be held accountable. And instead, what the French and the Saudis and the Americans and too many other states in the United Nations are doing is trying to reverse, to take away all of those gains and put the Palestinians back into a situation like Oslo, where decade after decade they negotiate for an amorphous two-state solution that never comes, while Israel consolidates its illegal gains and gets its regime normalized. And again, not a word about genocide or apartheid or any of the crimes that are being perpetrated. So that's what they're trying to do. If this can be blocked in the Security Council, there is an opportunity again in the General Assembly for them to use that moment to convene under Uniting for Peace and adopt the draft resolution that is in the hands of the Colombians and others, in particular among the Hague group of states that have pledged to stand up against the Israeli regime and to try to provide some accountability and some redress. It won't happen if it's left to the shadows of Turtle Bay. It will only happen if global civil society makes enough noise in capitals of their own countries in particular to demand that their government supports a Uniting for Peace resolution that holds Israel accountable and provides a consent-based protection force to protect Palestinian civilians with a specific mandate not to be a colonial proxy occupation as envisaged by the US or by the French and the Saudis, but to be a force that is only mandated to protect civilians, to ensure the delivery of humanitarian aid, to preserve evidence of Israeli crimes, and to begin the process of reconstruction in Gaza. No meddling with the affairs of the Palestinians, no interference with Palestinian governance, no denial of the rights of certain sectors of Palestinian society, but protection and aid and the implementation of the rules of international law for the first time in a very long time. That draft exists. That legal process in the UN exists. But you can see Israel's friends are doing everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen, and instead that they get a UN stamp of approval for what is 19th century colonialism in the 21st century.
Well, thank you. With that, we conclude our first panel for this conference. Thank you, Albert. Thank you, Tony, for an amazing and momentous presentation that leave all of us more knowledgeable than when we started. Thank you all.